So first we're going to do the basket weave stitch, but before we get started, I want to talk about the anatomy of the needlepoint canvas. So when we stitch the basket weave stitch, we are doing so on the diagonal. So the rows that we're stitching on are diagonal rows. You'll notice that on your canvas, this first corner here, I've painted the diagonal rows for you so that you can see how the diagonal rows need to operate. I've only done that though for this one section. The rest of the canvas you are on your own. So for this one section, these are like your training wheels to help you see and understand the diagonal rows. Now when it's not painted on for you, like this, there is another clue to show you which diagonal row you're on, and that is what we call the steps and poles. Now let me show you with my fingers. I'll show you with my fingers which one is a step and which one is a pole. And then once you see it on my fingers, you may be able to see it then on the canvas. So when the canvas is going on top of the other canvas and the top canvas is horizontal like this is a step. When the canvas is on top of the other canvas but the top thread is going vertical, that is a pole. So this is what a step looks like, and this is what a pole looks like. Zooming in, we're gonna zoom in really close here. You'll see on my canvas that the steps are painted blue. You see that canvas intersection is painted blue, and the poles are left white. So the canvas intersections that are blue are steps, and the canvases that are white are poles. Hopefully you'll be able to see that. Now coming over here, the same rules apply even when it's not painted like this. So this is a step, this is a pole, 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 step, 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 pole, 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 step, 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 etc. Now the reason that we call them steps and poles is because when we are stitching in basket weave, the mnemonic device that we use to know where we're going is we walk up the steps and we slide down the poles like a fireman pole. So that refers to the row and what direction you're stitching it in. So because when you're stitching a row on the diagonal, you're going to be moving along like this when you're stitching. So if you see that you are on a step row, you know that you're going to need to be stitching one step and then going up the next 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 step until you reach the end of the row. When you see the pole steps, you know you need to slide down the fireman, slide down the fireman pole, 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 slide down the fireman pole until you complete the row of pole steps. Now, another thing to know when you're doing the basket weave stitch or any stitch in needlepoint, when the design area stops, you stop. So you see this background section that's white here. We're going to use the red borders of the outside border and the heart as the places that tell us where we need to stop. Always do what the paint on the canvas tells you to do. Don't color outside of the lines. Always color inside of the lines when you are stitching. So let's get started and I will show you how to do the basket weave stitch on this section right here. In needlepoint, anchoring is what we call getting your thread started. So when you are anchoring and there's no thread, no stitching in this project whatsoever, see on the back there's no stitching in this project whatsoever, one way to get started is to use a waist knot. W-A-S-T-E and K-N-O-T. Okay, so a waist knot. So what you do is you make a knot. I'm going to wrap the thread into a loop, and then I'm going to twist the thread around itself inside of the loop a bunch of times to make a really thick knot. Once I get it to where I want it, then I'm gonna pull the tail, make myself a nice thick knot here. Once I get the knot, I am going to place the knot at some random place. I'm gonna start stitching over here, but I want the knot to be over here so that while I'm stitching and I'm filling in this area, the thread on the back is held in place by the knot. And so when I'm stitching behind it, I will be covering this thread here, this waist thread, with my other threads and my stitches, and then eventually I'll be able to cut the knot off when I get close enough. I'm gonna cut off this tail though, because I feel like the tail will get in my way. So when there are no other stitches in the canvas, a waist knot is the way to go. When there are other stitches in the canvas, you'll anchor it a different way. I don't like to use waist knots except for the very, very first knot. When we are doing tent stitches in needlepoint, you're always going from the bottom left to the top right of the canvas intersection. So your very first stitch will be in this corner right here, and it is just a simple tent stitch like that. That is your tent stitch. Now you will notice that that first corner was colored blue because that's a step. So that means when I do the next row, the next diagonal row is going to be a pole. So I'm going to move over to the next row and I'm going to stitch this pole and then come down, slide down the fireman pole to finish the row and stitch the next pole here. Now that I've reached the end of this row, the next row is going to be steps. So I'm going to come down to this row and stitch step, walk up the step, walk up the step again. Now that I've reached the end of that row, and I know that I've reached the end of the row because there are no more steps in that white color, then I'll move over to stitch the next row. The next row is coming down and it's poles. So I'm going to slide down the fireman's pole here, slide down the fireman's pole here, slide down the fireman's pole here, and so on. Hopefully by this time you are starting to see how the diagonal rows work because they are painted onto the canvas. So this next row is steps. So I'm gonna come up the steps. Now, really quickly, while I'm stitching, I'm gonna talk a little bit. So when you are stitching the basket weave stitch, your stitch is actually going to interlock with the stitches in the row previous to it. So the row above it, you see how my stitch, when I'm coming back down, is coming between those two stitches? It's like in the basket weave stitch, you leave a little bit of space. So these stitches are kind of far apart from one another, but when you fill in the rows, they interlock with one another. Coming down again to do the fireman's pole, coming down the fireman's pole. You see how the stitches are interlocking with each other very nicely? one of the reasons that I'm not giving you an exact color match on this project is because I know that some beginners struggle to see it when the colors are too close to one another. And so I want you to be able to see clearly exactly where the thread is, exactly where the color is, and know what you're doing and be able to really, really see it. So with the pink against this white background, you'll really see how the stitches are filling in, and then the blue is a contrasting color, so you'll really be able to see the blue rows as well. So walking up the steps, gonna just fill this in. And you see too, as I'm following the design, each row is a little bit different in terms of its size. Now, this is the traditional way to teach basket weave, is like on a corner, but once we get to the heart, then you will see how to stitch the basket weave in an irregular shape that's not a square, and you'll see how it works, figuring out where to start on an irregular shape. We're also going to work our way around the heart, so that's what's coming next, is working our way behind the heart, doing the background, stitching the heart, and then just seeing how it all works together in the basket weave stitch. So you can take this skill and this stitch to other projects that are a lot more complicated. Now at this point, my waist knot is over here and I'm getting closer and closer to it. I'm going to cut off the waist knot right now, and we can look behind and see that the thread got completely covered over by stitches. So that is a good thing. That means that our waist knot did exactly what we wanted it to do. It anchored the thread down. Now we won't need to use the waist knot again on this project. That is for the very first step. Once I get, really low on thread here, I'll show you how to anchor your thread into itself on the back to finish off your thread, and then how to start a new one. Once you get the hang of the basket weave stitch, it does sort of become like a mindless meditative process, which I find very, very enjoyable. There's all kinds of cool stitches that you can do in needlepoint, but I find that basket weave is extremely relaxing and a lot of fun. So I usually have a project that I do like only in basket weave, and I love it. When you are needle pointing, it's best practice to use the basket weave stitch for everything except for straight lines, just because the basket weave stitch keeps your project very stable. It doesn't warp your canvas, and it sort of creates this basket looking effect on the back with super full coverage on the back side to strengthen the canvas even more. It's very good. All right, so I only have a couple inches left of thread here. So I'm going to anchor the thread into the back. Now when you're anchoring in your basket weave, always anchor your thread with the needle going horizontally or vertically. So you see here I've plunged the needle through the stitching on the back, and then I'm going to pull the thread all the way through there. Now sometimes I like to just take it under once more for good luck, for good measure, make sure nothing slides free, which it shouldn't. But once that is done, then I'm going to cut off the tail and I'll be ready to start a new thread. So I've got my new thread, going to thread my needle, and now to anchor back in, I'm going to pretty much do the opposite of what I just did, coming back down. And you don't have to go like the whole length. If you just get it in like 3 or 4 stitches, that should be fine. And then if you get it in 3 or 4 stitches, get that tail all the way covered, come back through, wrap your needle around just the last stitch or so, and that way it's like very, very tight and you're not gonna pull your thread out of the canvas. My tension tends to be tight, and so sometimes I'll just pull the thread clear through the canvas, which is very annoying, and then I have to anchor it all over again. Okay, so finding where I was again, you can see that I ended about here, so I have 2 more pulls to slide down, and then I can start my row up there. Now, when you are putting down a project and picking it back up again, this is a very important skill to sort of recognize where you left off and where you're going. So looking at this and knowing that I have 2 pulls means I was coming down this row, and then the next row is going to go up. Now, if you finish and you're at the end of the row, then you have to look at the canvas threads and say, okay, this next row is going to be a step row, so I'm going to work my way up. So I'm going to anchor in towards the bottom, and so that I can do the row going from the bottom back up to the top again, or the opposite if you find that you're by the poles. All right, I'm gonna stitch these last 2 rows, and then I will meet you back here when I get to this point, because I've got to come up these steps, come down the pole, and then come back up these steps, and then we will be at the heart. So I'll meet you back here when I finish this row so that we can talk about the heart.